Good day, fellow viewer. Before we get started, first things first. Today's divine revelation comes to us from chapter 3 of the Book of the Way. So please remain seated and, yeah. And it came to pass, after the breadth of the word was known, that the student desired to know the letters, for they said, if the vowel be the breadth of the word, what then giveth it its shape? And the voice spake, saying, behold the consonants, for they are the frame upon which speech is built. For it is written, the breath giveth life to the word, yet the consonant guideth its path. Some stand alone before the eye, and their sound is plain to the ear. These shall the student learn first, one by one, until their voice is known without confusion. But the matter endeth not here. For certain letters walk together, and their sound is changed when they are joined. And there are forms within the syllable that appear not as they seem, yet must be spoken rightly. Therefore the teaching shall come in two measures. First shall the student behold the letters that stand alone, and learn their sound with clarity. Then shall the student return to behold the letters that join together, and the forms hidden within the syllable. For he who perceiveth these things shall read with confidence, and his speech shall not falter. Line by line, sound by sound, until the tongue groweth accustomed to the order of the language. Therefore let the student take heed. You better listen. Despises not the humble letter, for even the smallest sound shapeth the word. Thus it is written, and thus you shall learn. Okay, enough said. With the divine reading set aside, let's begin. First things first, if this is your first time watching, welcome to my humble abode. My name's Kevin, you're watching The Way of Fluency. Now, if you're watching this, I'm making the broad assumption that you're wanting to learn Spanish. If that's the case, welcome. If not, you're in the wrong channel, dude. Now, for the rest of you who are up to date with this stuff, this today is our third session. We are talking about consonants. This is part of a small series that is related to Spanish sounds. And the ultimate goal is, by the time you're done with all these lessons, you will be able to pronounce practically every word in the Spanish language, whether you know it or not. So if that interests you, stick around. If not, don't waste your time here. Now, for those of you who are up to date, before we get started, grab a copy of the handout. It looks something like this. I will be using it in today's session as we go over the single letter consonants and give explanations of them. This lesson technically is supposed to be single letter consonants followed by double consonants followed by unique syllables. But there's a lot to cover, so I'm going to split this into two parts. Today, we're going to cover the 22 single letter consonants of the Spanish alphabet. And then on our second video, we're going to cover dual letter consonants. We're going to cover unique syllables. And we are going to also briefly discuss the syllabary, which is something you'll have access to by the end of probably this lesson or the next one, where you'll have a table with all the consonants of the Spanish language mashed up with the Spanish vowels, so you can practically practice every sound that exists in the Spanish language. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to transfer over to my trusty little whiteboard and make sure that everything is working. We're just going to go through it pretty straightforward. There are 22 letters in total, so brace yourself. Our first letter will be the letter B, or letra B. And the example word for that will be the word for baby. Be. Pretty straightforward. Now, let me make a small little comment here. Notice this little thing up here. This is called an accent mark. This is something that is present in the Spanish language that English does not have. So what does an accent mark do? It's quite simple. The accent mark tells you where the force of pronunciation goes in a word. So for example, the word bebé has two syllables. You have be, but the one that has the accent mark says you have to pronounce it with a little bit more force. So you would say be. It's almost like you go be as far as the pronunciation goes. Now, I'm not going to go too in-depth into this because our next session will be all about stress and accent marks. But I will tell you this ahead of time. If you see a word without an accent mark, for example, if I write the same word and I don't have that accent mark, the actual meaning of the word changes. This accent mark up here tells me that I have to say bebe, in which case that means baby in English. But over here, it's the same word. There is no accent mark. Therefore, the natural pronunciation of this word is bebe. Notice that? Bebe versus bebe. Bebe means to drink. In other words, it's a conjugation of the verb that means he drinks. Él bebe. But if I add that accent mark, now it means baby. Bebe. Okay, so there are some changes in meaning depending on how the word is written and whether or not that accent mark is present. For more information on this, just stay in touch for that particular lesson that will come later on once we're done with all the consonants and whatnot. Okay, but for now, just keep that in mind. The focus here is the letter B, letra B, and the example word for that will be the Spanish for baby or bebé. Okay, bebé. Next up, we have the letter C or letra C. Notice that the C has an asterisk, and there's a good reason for that. The letter C has two pronunciations. It can be sounded as a K or it can be sounded as a S. An example word for the pronunciation with the K sound will be the word casa, which means house. Once again, casa. On the other hand, an example word that has the S sound will be the Spanish for heaven or cielo. All right? Cielo. Now, probably a question that's going to pop in your head at some point. How do I know which one is with a C and which one is with a K? Well, I'm glad you asked. Technically, there is no actual way of knowing that, unfortunately. But there is a general rule of thumb. Let me go ahead and change to the right marker here. Let me give you this example word. Conocimiento. This is a Spanish word that means knowledge, conocimiento. Notice that there are two C's. There's one C in the middle of the word. There's a C at the beginning of the word. Most often than not, and do not take my word for it because it's not set in stone, okay? If the C is inside the word, it will have an S sound, most often than not. If, on the other hand, the C is at the beginning of the word, it will have a K sound. Now, most often than not, because the example I just gave you is a good example of when the rule of thumb doesn't work. This word is cielo. The C is at the beginning of the word, and yet the pronunciation is of a S. Okay? Unfortunately, that's just how the language is done. I did not come up with it. So, thing to keep in mind is the C in Spanish has two sounds. It has a K sound and it has an S sound. If the C is in the middle of the word, most likely than not, it will have an S sound. And if it is at the beginning of the word, it will have a K sound. Sometimes those rules are broken though. So you unfortunately won't know it 100% until you have somebody tell you the word or you hear it from somewhere. Okay? But this exists that way. You're not caught off guard. And honestly, most of the examples, most of the words that have C on them, they do follow that rule of thumb. There are just some oddballs, like the word cielo, for example, that doesn't follow that. Next up, we have the letter D, or letra D. The example word for that will be the Spanish for finger, which is dedo. Once again, dedo. Simple enough. Next up, we have the letter F, or letra F. The example word for this will be fuego, which means fire. Fuego, fire. Next up, we have the letter G, or letra G. Now notice that letter G also has an asterisk next to it. That is because it has two different ways of sounding. The letter G has two forms, 1 and 2. I think it's the best way I can describe it. On the first form is what I would call a strong G. So in G, I think the same thing happens in English. You have a soft G and a strong G. The strong G in Spanish is the sound G, as in the word, I guess the English word, Gatsby. The word Gatsby is a hard G, okay? The example word for us in Spanish will be the word for cat, which is gato, okay? That G sound is the same as in the word Gatsby. On the other hand, we have what is called a soft G. The soft G has a sound that is more similar to that of an H, okay? Like a he sound. An example word for that in Spanish will be the word for general. And actually, this is a very good word to know because it's written the same way as in English, okay? In English, you say general, and the G is a hard G. It's almost like you're saying Jeep, like this, J. But in Spanish, it's more of an H sound. So it will be general. It's almost if I'm saying general, he, or this kind of sound for you, he. That is what we call a soft G, all right? Compared to the letter C, this one doesn't have any particular rules that I'm aware of. It's just some words are pronounced one way, some words are pronounced the other. It really boils down to you knowing the specific word. I don't think there's a generalized rule of thumb. I might be wrong. I am not all-knowing like God is, so take that with a grain of salt. But for your purposes, the letter G in Spanish or the letter G has two sounds. It has a strong sound, which is the G, as in the word gato, which means cat, and or it can be pronounced as an H-E-H sound, G, as in the word general, which is the Spanish pronunciation of the English version general. Okay? English general, Spanish general. You can use that word to compare yourself and see how you're pronouncing the vowels. If you recall from our last session, vowels hold the majority of the accent potential, whether it sounds good or bad. So this word, given that it's written in both English and Spanish, is a good practice for that, and it will also help you practice the soft G. Okay? General, general. First pronunciation, gato, hard G, gato, which means cat. Okay? Next letter up, we have the letter H, or letra H. Now, notice that the H also has an asterisk, but this one is a little bit tricky. Technically, the H in Spanish, the example word that we have here is the word for ice, which is hielo. For the most part, the H is silent, meaning it will not be pronounced. It's almost as if I'm writing this as hielo. There's no H. I just read it as is, hielo. In most places or most Spanish-speaking people that I'm aware of, this is how it's going to be. That being said, the H can also be somewhat pronounced, as in the interjection example of ha, right? Like if someone's doing something and, it's being funny to say, ha, you fail or whatever, that pronunciation is actually pronouncing the H sound, ha. It's almost like you're saying something like that, ha. But for the most part, with most words in the Spanish language, the H is going to be silent. So it's not going to be pronounced. You can pretend it does not exist. All right? So just keep that in mind. Next up, we have the letter J, or in Spanish, la letra J. The letter J, ironically, in Spanish, tends to sound like the H that we just saw. And the example word for that is jabón. Okay? Now, this might be a little bit of a challenge for you as a native English speaker. Why? Because for you, J is J, as in the word Jeep, right? Like Jeep. So you would not call this jabón. That makes no sense. It's ridiculous. Technically, the J sounds more of an H, or arguably for some people, depending on the country, it might sound as a soft G. Remember, these have practically the same sound, more or less. The soft G, the H, and the J, they all have a similar sound. So for our purposes, every time you see something like this, it'll be jabón, almost as if you're saying H-A-H. Now, on the other hand, there is something called Spanglish. We have a lot of borrowed words in the Spanish language. An example of that is the word jeep. There is no other way of saying this in Spanish. So the way you say it in English is the exact same way we say it in Spanish. So the J can also be pronounced as in English J. So maybe a slightly stronger pronunciation, but at least in my experience in just everyday speech and communication, most often than not, is going to have a soft pronunciation similar to that of an H or a soft G. Next up, we have the letter K, or letra K. Now the letter K has an example word of koala, which this is also another good word for you to practice with. It is a word that is written the same way as it is in English, and the pronunciation is practically the same. The only thing that's different is how you pronounce the vowels. Hopefully you're starting to notice why I kept hammering on the fact that vowels control the bulk of your pronunciation. Okay? In Spanish, this will be read as koala, koala. Next up, we have the letter L, or letra L. The example word for this will be the Spanish for book, which is libro. Once again, libro. Nothing else to add there. Next up, we have the letter M, or letra M. In Spanish, the example word we have here is mono, mono, which means monkey. Next up, we have the letter N, or letra N. And the example word for that will be the word noche, which means night. Noche. Now, this will be covered in our next part, which is, this is a double consonant that will be covered in our next session. But for our purposes, that CH sound is practically the same of a SH sound, more or less. So, noche, almost like saying cheap, or like something is cheap. Actually, that's a better example. When you say, oh, something is cheap, that ch sound is the same sound that we have over here. So when you pronounce it, it's just noche, noche. Next up, we have a letter that does not exist in the English alphabet, and that is the letter, I don't even know what to call it in English, honestly. I don't think it has a name. It is an N with a squiggly line. In Spanish, that will be la letra ñ, okay? Letra ñ. Now, the example word for this is ironically a word that you already know in English. It is the word lasagna, okay? This GN sound in the word lasagna is the closest thing I can get to the true sound of the letter ñ. In Spanish, the word is written the same way for the exception of the GN sound. Lasagna. Okay? Instead, you will see it something like this. It is an N with a squiggly line. That is the letter ñ in Spanish. So for us, it will be read as lasagna. Okay? Once again, lasagna. Notice the change in the vowels compared to the pronunciation of lasagna. Okay, it's different. That GN sound is the closest sound I have to this. Okay, so you technically know the sound, you just have to say it with a more Spanish accent or Spanish pronunciation from a vowel standpoint. So once again, letra ñ, example word, lasagna. Moving along, we're done with one page. Man, we're moving quick. All right, next letter, I pressed something. For us will be the letter P, or letra P. An example word for that will be the word pelo, which means hair. Once again, letra P, example word pelo, pelo. Moving on, we have the letter Q or letra Q. And for our purposes, an example word for that will be the word queso, which means cheese. Okay, queso. Now, the letter Q, I was trying to think of if I could find a word that has something, a different pronunciation, but it seems not to have that. The letter Q in Spanish is practically the same sound as the letter K. So, another thing that I forgot to mention. This right here, you will see it in our next session that is also part of the unique syllables that are present in Spanish. I want to cover a little bit more at that point. But basically what happens is every time you see a Q, U, and some other variable here, most often than not, you're going to ignore that U. So that U is not pronounced. In other words, this QUE is equal to just QE, essentially. Or if we're going for the strict pronunciation, it's almost like this. So this is the same as that. QUE equals KE. So when you see it, you go que. In this case, queso, let me erase this to get some space. In this case, if I look at the word queso, this is supposed to be a Q, I can look at it like this, queso. This is how it's pronounced, queso. So keep that in mind. The letter Q or Q is pronounced as a K in Spanish. Next up, we have the letter R. Now, this one has an asterisk, but it's not because it has multiple pronunciations. It's actually due to another problem. The letter R is arguably one of the hardest letters for native English speakers to grasp. The reason being is R's in English are bent or twisted. I don't know how to call it. It's more like a pirate R. So if you try to make an R like a pirate, you'll know what I'm talking about. On the other hand, in the Spanish language, the R is a rolled R. So it has the tongue that's a small flicker behind the upper teeth of the mouth. The challenge with it is, on the one hand, I'm unable to teach this letter properly. Best I can give you some guiding tips. I just want to be transparent about it because I have a medical condition where my frenulum of my tongue is too short, which means I can barely put my tongue out of my mouth. So in other words, I'm unable, even though I can pronounce it briefly, I am unable to sustain a rolled R as other native Hispanics can. I'm unable to do that, and therefore I don't have a way of properly articulating how to get you from your English R to the Spanish R. Therefore, between this and probably the next session, because we're going to cover the double R as well, I'm going to go ahead and add links to videos that I found online on YouTube that of people who have done a good job at explaining how to do the roll R. That way you can get some more information on how to do it properly. Unfortunately, I can't do it as I wish. So I just want to be transparent on that end. That being said, an example word for our case will be the word for king, which is rey. Okay, notice the sound that I make when I pronounce that word, rey. Okay, it's a very quick flicker, if you will. The closest thing I can give you as far as hints to try to get towards that sound is to play with the word broom. B-R-O-O-M. Broom. The reason being is B-R-O-O-M and the word vroom are very close, and most kids at some point in time have played around making sounds with their voice and making engine sounds like vroom, 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 vroom. If you adopt a silly mindset for a small period of time where you're playing around with the word broom, you go from broom, 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 broom. Okay? So I went from the English R, broom, broom, and just playing around with how I keep saying that word in my mouth mentally. Eventually you kind of will end up at that spot where you can say broom. Like broom, 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 broom. That's just me playing around, going from broom, 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 broom. And that broom sound is the roll R sound that we're aiming for. That's just as best as I can come up with at the time being. Like I said, I will have probably a couple of videos linked in the description below that will go over the rolled R. Just do know, however, that the R is a challenge for native English speakers, so don't feel bad if you have a hard time getting it. And number two, even if you can't roll the R, that is perfectly fine. People will still understand you. You can say hooray or you can say ray. That is fine. The pronunciation is still there and people will understand what you're trying to say. So don't be bogged down because you can't pronounce the letter R, all right? Just know that it is a rolled R, and unfortunately, in my situation, I'm unable to teach it properly. So I'm just being transparent on that end. You will have the links in the video, and on our second session where we discuss the double R, I will also have those links there as well, all right? So our next letter is the letter S, or letra S. In Spanish, the word for that will be silla, which means chair. Again, this will be covered in our next part, but this right here is also a double consonant that is present in the language, is the double L. And in this particular case, it is read as a Y or as a J, okay? So it has the J sound or the Y sound. So you can see this as if you're reading this, silla, or some people might see it like this, silla. Either way, it's a hard J, silla, okay? There is another pronunciation to it, but we're gonna get to that once we get to our second part, all right? For now, just understand letra S, letter S, example word, silla, okay? Silla. Next up, we have the letter T for Terminator. Just kidding. T, an example word for us will be tomate. Okay, this has two T sounds. Tomate, which means tomato. It is the same pronunciation as the English equivalent practically. Tomato. And by that I mean the actual consonant. I'm talking about the consonant. It's the same sound. Tomate. Okay, so you take away this and you end up with the Spanish word tomate. All right, tomato, letra T or letter T. Next up, we have the letter V or letra V. The example for that will be the word violin. Now notice that the word violin has that accent mark, which means our force of pronunciation is going to go on that last syllable. Now notice that this is written in the same way as English too, but the way it's pronounced is different because of the flaring and bending of the vowels, right? You would say violin, violin. In Spanish though, it is violin. You read it as is. There is no flaring, there is no bending, there's no curving of the vowels. Every sound is pronounced in a straight line from point A to point B. Once again, letra V, letter V, Spanish word violin. We accent mark on this part because of that little squiggle right there. Violin. Next up, we have that letter W or W, or some people call it W. The example word for us will be the word kiwi. Now, I will go ahead and tell you the W is not really used that much in the English language. I could barely find words that have the W in it, but the pronunciation is practically the same as the English, okay? Is W, is the W sound. In this case, kiwi, kiwi. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have for that one. Next up, we have the letter X. Now, the letter X has a asterisk next to it, and there's a somewhat good reason for that. Number one, the X almost has a sound like this. It's a KS sound. X, X, X. The example word for this is a universal word across many, many languages, and that is taxi. Okay? Taxi. So you know how to pronounce this already because you have that word in the English language. Taxi. You just have to say it with a more Spanish accent. Taxi. Now, the other aspect to this though is in some instances, in some countries, some words, the X can have a bit of a H sound or soft G or soft J sound. What I mean by this, a good example of this is the word for Mexico. But Mexico is the English pronunciation. In Spanish, the word is pronounced Mexico. Some instances you might see it written like this with a J instead, Mexico. But I have seen it, and it is a thing where you see it written with the X, and yet the pronunciation of that X is similar to that of a soft G, soft J, or an H sound. Hence why the X has an asterisk. I just want to make you aware of that, okay? So you want to say Mexico. You could technically, I guess it will be okay. But it seems, for what I've learned, it is more of an English pronunciation. In Spanish, it is technically Mexico. I could be wrong. That's okay. Just keep in mind that such pronunciations does exist for this letter. But most often than not, it's gonna be the KS sound found in the word taxi. Next up, we have the letter Y, or in English it's called Y. Fun fact, that word, that term, it means Y, which means Greek I, essentially. This is what this means. This is the name of this, Y. The Y, or Y, has two sounds in Spanish. The first one is the most straightforward one. It's found in the word yo, which is a personal pronoun that means I. In Spanish, it is yo. It has the sound of a hard J, if you will, okay? So you can look at it as a hard J. Yo could be pronounced like this, yo, or yo. I guess is the closest I can assimilate it to how the sound sounds in Spanish. On the other hand, let me make some space here. On the other hand, you have yo. You also have an I pronunciation found in the word muy. This muy is a adverb, so I could say muy bonito. So if I say a sentence or phrase like muy bonito, very pretty, it's the equivalent of English very. But this Y is pronounced as an I. Spanish I, remember. In English you say I, in Spanish is E, okay? It's this kind of sound, E. So when you read this, muy, it's almost as if you are reading this, muy. So the letter Y in Spanish has two sounds. It has the J sound, like in yo or I, and it has the E sound, Spanish E sound, as in muy, okay? Muy and yo. Last but not least, we have the letter Z, or letra Z. Now, the letter Z has technically one pronunciation, but I'm going to be as thorough as I can. I'm going to give you a couple of more extras. The example word is the word zebra. In English, you would say zebra. But here's the thing. It's different e, and this is a different a. Zebra versus zebra. In Spanish, you don't round the vowels, and the E in Spanish is different. It's e instead of E. Now, here's the thing. The letter Z technically has an S sound. All right? In most Spanish-speaking countries, for the most part, they will pronounce the Z as an S. Okay, you will hear that very often. In some countries, Spain is peculiar about this. They have a particular pronunciation for the Z, and it sounds more like a TH sound. It's almost like zebra. And I'm not even making it. That's not the best example, to be honest, because I don't say it this way. But they accentuate that Z sound in such a way that you can tell is a Z. So instead of saying zebra, they would say something like the zebra. It's almost the same as in English. In English, you have a very peculiar and distinct way of pronouncing the Z. It's Z, zebra. It's hard to miss that. In Spanish, though, it could be either or. It gets mixed up. Most often than not, you will hear it as an S sound, zebra, but you will not hear in some countries, in some countries, you will have a bit of a more pronounced Z sound that is hard to miss. At the very least, you will know that it's not an S if you hear it. But just be aware, there are two ways of pronouncing it based on experience and just living and existing in general. Most people tend to just say straight up S. So that is that. So we've covered, let me go back to our right here. We have covered practically 22 single consonants of the Spanish language. So now you have that, you have the tables, you have the Spanish words, you have the English words, and you have the pronunciation table to practice along with that. That's a lot of stuff right there, okay? You are one step closer to practically pronouncing any single word or sound that you want in the Spanish language. All right, that's all I have for you. Like always, take care, do not die. I'll be seeing you in our next meetup. Bye-bye.